With this video today, our goal is to help you choose the correct arrow for your bow. In my opinion, the arrow is much more important than the bow. A lot of people buy an expensive bow and they buy inexpensive arrows and expect to have performance. It's kind of like buying a Ferrari and putting inexpensive tires on it. You're just not going to get the performance that the Ferrari is capable of. Arrows are very important because there's several different aspects of the arrow that contribute to the arrow flight. One of them is spine, or stiffness of the arrow. I'm going to show you, we have three different bows here. We have a center shot bow, which means the shelf is cut beyond center of the angle of the string, a 1/8 of an inch off center, and a non-shelf bow called a self bow, where the arrow sits at a very drastic angle. I'll show you right here. First we'll start with the center shot bow. And you'll see that the arrow, when I point the arrow is in alignment or close to perfect alignment with the string. It points straight forward. With the 1/8 of an inch off center bow, you'll notice there's an increase in the angle from the alignment of the string and the bow. Then with the completely non-cut bow, you'll notice there's even more of a drastic angle. See that angle right there? What we need to do with these three different bows is change the stiffness of the arrow. For the same poundage bow, the same draw length, and the same diameter arrow, we need to change the stiffness or spine of that arrow. When we let go of the string, it causes the energy to push the arrow forward, causing paradox or bending in the arrow. With the center shot bow, we can get away with a much stiffer arrow than we can with the non-center shot bows. With the self bow, we need even more drastic paradox to bend around the handle of the bow and then straighten out. Some of the things that change the paradox of the arrow are length of the arrow, stiffness of the arrow, and weight of the point. Another one is the balance point. I've been asked several times, what is the difference between a parallel arrow and a tapered arrow? A parallel arrow, the shaft diameter is the same all the way, the full length of the shaft. On a tapered arrow, and a basic straight taper, it's tapered from one diameter here, 10 inches from the back, to a smaller diameter in the back, thus moving the front of center balance point more forward in the arrow. What that does is it helps recover the arrow from that bending or paradox so that the arrow spends more time flying forward and less energy going side to side. It's a lot like taking a rock and tying a 2-foot string to it and throwing the rock. What's the string going to do? It's going to follow the rock. That's what we want in arrows, is we want the back of the arrow to follow the front and spend less inertia going side to side and more going forward. Okay, let's back up and first of all cover the stiffness of the arrow to match the different bows. As a general rule of thumb, for a center shot bow, such as this recurve right here, you would want to go 10 pounds over the weight of the bow in deflection or spine of the arrow. We don't have as much of a paradox issue with a center shot bow, so we can get away with having a stiffer arrow. On a 1/8 of an inch off center, which most modern longbows are, I tend to go 5 pounds over the weight of the bow. On a self bow, or a non-center shot cut bow like this one, we tend to go 5 to 10 pounds under the weight of the bow, depending on alignment of where the string sits in alignment with the handle. Some of the things that change that is string choice. Strings such as fast flight create more energy transfer from the bow to the arrow, so we automatically up the stiffness of the arrow about 5 pounds over the Dacron B50, which has more stretch and does not transfer as much energy. Another thing that changes the stiffness or the spine choice of an arrow is the point weight. The point weight at the standard 125 grain has to be increasing in spine with the increase in point weight, such as this broadhead here, which is 160 grains. As you add more weight to the front, you create more paradox in order to move that arrow. The same thing happens when you have a longer arrow. The standard industry is a 28-inch back of point, which is measured from crotch of nock to back of point. That's a standard draw length for the archery industry. If we have a longer arrow, we have to increase the spine or stiffness because we are adding more mass to the front of that balance point. One of the other aspects that you can choose from is feather choice. I prefer a much taller, larger feather, like this Raptor cut, which increases the feather surface. By increasing the feather surface, you create more drag on the back of the arrow, which gives you more of a variance of spine, kind of like removing some of the human error factor than, say, a small feather. You can do that by longer feathers, more feathers such as four-fletch, or taller feathers. One of the common issues of arrow flight is the brace height of the bow. The brace height is the measurement between the handle of the bow and the string. By changing that, we can affect the arrow flight. Most manufacturers have a suggested brace height to set your bow at. To show you up close what we're talking about is if this arrow is on this string at the suggested brace height, in this case it's 7 3/8 of an inch on this bow, if we decrease this brace height, it increases the angle of the arrow. Notice how the tip is moving more to the left. As we bring it back and increase the brace height, that brings that arrow closer in line with the string. But if you get too high, you decrease the performance of the return of the limb, so there's an optimum sweet spot in there. And that is most important when finding the correct spine for your arrow and testing, is to make sure that your brace height of your bow is correct. One of your other choices is the overall mass weight of the arrow. I like to go by a general rule of thumb of 10 grains per pound of bow. Some people go 8 to 12, some people choose lighter, some people choose heavier, depending on what you're doing. Hunters tend to go for a heavier arrow because of penetration issues. Target shooters tend to go for a lighter arrow because it gives you less mass and more overall downrange or distance with a flat trajectory. I like to go by the 10 grains per pound because that kind of gives me the best of both worlds. If I have a 55-pound bow, I like to have a 550 grain arrow. And I can choose that by the mass of the wood choice, which, say in the case of Douglas fir shafting, would be a little heavier than Port Orford cedar or Sitka spruce. And I can match all those. There's several different options on how you can choose that. Point weight, the amount of finish you put on. Like a standard finish in our arrows is 3 coats of clear lacquer. If I need to achieve a little heavier arrow, I can add a couple more coats of finish. That increases between 10 and 20 grains. I like to match them to that 10 grains per pound because it kind of seems like the sweet spot. Just like in the brace height, there's a sweet spot on mass arrow weight. If you have too light, there's a trade-off. If you have too heavy, there's a trade-off. So kind of finding that balance point in the center works best for me. Okay, so let's back up. I know there's been a lot of information thrown at you here. Let's just back up and give you a quick little overview on arrow choices. First of all would be your shaft wood, which will help dictate your mass weight, which we just covered. Second would be the spine weight, or deflection, the bending of the arrow shaft. Next would be the length of the arrow. And I recommend that you always have an arrow that's at least 1 inch longer than your draw length, whether you're shooting a broadhead or a field point. Especially important with a broadhead because if you draw that broadhead over your knuckle, you're going to cut yourself. So it's important to have at least 1 inch over the length of your overall arrow length for the finished arrow. The next option would be your feather choice, which will help in arrow flight or paradox because of the recovery and the resistance that we talked about. Most of it, like say the difference between the shield cut and the parabolic feathers and things like that, is a personal preference. And as far as color, boy, that again is a personal preference. One of the myths I'd like to blow out of the water here and just cover right away is a lot of people talk about a cock feather. And you'll see in this arrow here, the cock feather would be the one feather that's in alignment with the index or the side grain of your shaft that's a different color, so that when you apply the arrow on, the cock feather is facing out. The problem with that is if the cock feather is facing out, then this feather is going to hit. So it really makes no difference where the position of the feather is on your arrow. That's why we shoot feathers rather than plastic vanes on most traditional bows, because the feather folds down. You'll notice here on my personal arrows, which are these two, I do not have a cock feather or an indicator that tells me where to put it on. I put it on and shoot it. Also, the nock choice is important as far as which type of nock and what color. I like a nock that I can see. The other would be point weight, whether you're choosing broadheads or field points. Those are some of the things you need to consider when choosing your custom arrows. And if we can be any assistance here in helping you choose your custom arrows, feel free to call us or email us at raptorarchery.com. To learn more, visit our website at raptorarchery.com or stop by our store and museum in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge location of Hood River, Oregon.